Whoa, 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 no. What are you doing? Don't go with that bit for the intro. Oh, hey, future me, what's up? Don't do it. Don't use that track. He's gonna know. What do you mean he's gonna know? It's part of his shtick to play that track over his videos. He's gonna know. Okay, look, it's intentional. It's very clearly intentional, and not only he's gonna know, but I've got a very specific bit that I'm doing later that he's gonna know into. Okay, so there's a he's gonna know arc that I'm working towards, but it's all gonna make sense by the time we get to the end of the video. He's gonna know. It's hey, bud, he's gonna know. Okay, you know what? It doesn't matter if he knows, okay? And he's not gonna know. My channel is too damn small still. So maybe take a breath or something and maybe trust that I've got a plan in place here. Man, I really tried to warn you, but you always know what's best, don't you? Don't even with that. I mean, like, you don't know that he's going to know. How do you know that he's going to know? I'm literally you from the future. Huh. You know what? That's actually a good point. I hadn't even... Hey, wait a minute. When Wolfenstein dropped in 1992, no one could have predicted that it would be ground zero for a whole new category of gaming. Sure, it was new and different and visceral, but if someone had said in the moment, oh hey, yeah, so the guys who made this are gonna make another game just like this, but about demons on Mars and it's gonna be 10 times better, well, actually I think we probably would have listened because that sounds fucking awesome. But instead, everyone was much more focused on what would be the next Wolfenstein, or hell, what could be the next Wolfenstein. Scott Miller over at Apogee was certainly looking into that possibility at the time. Apogee had published Wolfenstein, so Miller, of course, had the intuition to strike again while the iron was hot. This resulted in Blake Stone, which we've covered, as well as the Wolfenstein expansion Spear of Destiny. Meanwhile, as Miller was exploring options, Tom Hall, one of the founding fathers of id, who not only worked on Wolfenstein, but on past classics such as Commander Keen, had left id due to some, creative differences, and since Miller was looking to make a new Wolfenstein, he decided why not hire one of the guys who actually made the original game. At first, the idea was to create another expansion pack to Wolfenstein under the title Rise of the Triad, Wolfenstein 3D Part 2. The plot of which would find good old BJ Blazkowicz discovering the cult-like group who had funded Hitler's exploits into fascism, but were now turning their attention directly into acquiring nukes and taking over the world themselves. The idea was so good that during development they decided to make the expansion into a full-blown sequel, just Wolfenstein II. But it eventually came to Apogee and shot that down because Apogee didn't actually have the rights to make a sequel, and it was getting ready to release Doom in 1993, and they probably didn't want a sequel to their last big game, casting a shadow over the premiere of their latest big game, which is understandable, but can you imagine a world where we got Wolfenstein 2 and Doom 2 in the same year? Because that would have been absolutely mind-blowing. Anyways, without id's blessing to use the Wolf IP, but still able to work with the Wolfenstein engine, development continued, with Hall quickly rewriting the scenario so that they could still use all of the assets that the developers had been working on for the past 6 months, without having to scrap everything and start over, such as weapons like the Walther PP pistol, the MP40 submachine gun, the various rocket launchers, and the Nazi-like uniforms worn by the Triad soldiers. The new storyline involved a special ops team called the High Risk United Nations Task Force, or the Hunt, dispatched to investigate a cult known as the Triad operating on an island off the coast of Southern California. When the Hunt is discovered, their boat is destroyed by the Triad, and in proper action game tradition, the Hunt is forced to wade across the island guns blazing to stop the Triad's genocidal efforts. Tom Hall was the project lead, but he wasn't the only brains behind the operation. Joe Siegler, William Scarborough, Mariana Weintraub, Nolan Martin, Jim Dosey, among others, made up the development team dubbed Developers of Incredible Power, or the Dips. Tom Hall bestowed this name on the group after a little note he sent everyone saying that if they were able to pull off the making of this game, they would become the developers of incredible power and go down in the history books. And, well, yeah, they pulled it off. Mostly. But, needless to say, the sheer amount of creativity, along with the absolutely batshit insane technical feats they pulled off using the fucking Wolfenstein engine, deserves a hell of a lot more credit than I think this game has ever received. Touching back on the fact that this is the fucking Wolfenstein engine, one thing I didn't know going into this is that John Carmack actually ended up providing some code for the developers of Incredible Power, loaning them the texture scaling code from Doom. So what we're seeing on display isn't just strictly Wolfenstein 3D under the hood, but a souped up hybrid engine which was defined both by the limitations of the original code and by the wild fucking tricks the team were able to pull off in modifying it. There's transparent glass. Shattering transparent glass, fog effects, dynamic lighting. Dynamic lighting! Yes, this is a Wolfenstein engine game with lighting effects. Holy shit! This is most evidence in torches or lamps around the arenas, and if you shoot or destroy them, the light in the surrounding area will dim slightly for every lamp and torch that you shatter. Oh, destructible environments. Barrels, pots, lamps, flags. There's a gratuitous number of objects that can be destroyed by your weapons as you strafe about, perforating pseudo-Nazis. And that's not even mentioning the jibs in this game. To my knowledge and research, Rise of the Triad marks the first time the word jibs was used in-game to refer to the bloody bits and bobs that we first-person gamers love to fucking see whenever we explode enemies in-game. Don't look at me like that, you know you do too. But Rise of the Triad takes this to a thorough extreme. Bodies here don't just explode. They dismantle, erupting into a fountain of gore and eyeballs and severed limbs so large every single enemy in the game should come with a splash zone warning. There's even a setting in the options menu to adjust how much blood and gore you want the game to display. And on top of that, there's a cheat code to turn on the super extreme jibs mode, which really fills the screen with over-the-top, actually seriously ludicrous amounts of jibs. Back in the day, this mode would cause lower tier computers to crash, so we mostly only activated it for fun and the giggle fest of watching more gore than a Hollywood movie in slow motion as the CPU came to a grinding halt and eventually shut down in self-preservation. Hey kids, Future Ranger here. Present day Ranger forgot to put another innovation of Rise of the Triad here in his script, which was, the fact that the multiplayer was kind of ahead of its time. Like, it could feature up to 11 players, which was pretty cool because Doom could only feature up to 4 players in Deathmatch. And, you know, the fact that the game also was the first-person shooter to feature, you know, capture the flag as a game mode. Yeah, Rise of the Triad was the first-person shooter to capture the flag multiplayer. I'm tired. Everybody asks why I'm trying to change the timeline, and then it's, you know, this shit right here. Another thing that set Rise of the Triad apart from a visual aesthetic perspective was the use of digitized actors placed into the game for the enemies. Using digital scans of real-world objects in games was nothing particularly new to the FPS field. Doom had done it, scanning arms and fake guns to use as props in-game. But here with the Rise of the Triad, there were props, objects, enemies, all scanned and placed into the game world to give off this fever dream realism. You see, kids, this little technique known as full motion video was a huge thing at the time, with games such as Night Trap and The Seventh Guest utilizing digital footage of real actors against green screen, or sometimes even full sets. And there was also this little game in 1992 you might have heard of called Mortal Kombat, which used a similar technique, but just to animate their characters. Digital actors were this huge rage for a while, found in a whole slew of Mortal Kombat clones, including one of my personal favorites, Batman Forever. This is a god-awful side-scrolling platformer beat-em-up for the SNES and the Genesis. I played the SNES version, which again is awful, but it was the best Batman game I'd ever played at the time, so I loved it, and I unironically still do. But the digital actors and objects help create a super crisp, clean, weird sort of reality within Rise of the Triad, and honestly, while I'm sure it may have been used elsewhere in FPS gaming, I can't recall where off the top of my head. Rise of the Triad has a terrifically unique look all of its own, although I've spoken to a bunch of gamers who are, frankly, kind of turned off by it. Now, there were some concerns amongst the dips and Apogee that even with all the fancy technical wizardry happening behind the scenes, Rise of the Triad was going to debut more than 2 years after Wolfenstein, more than a year after Doom, and 2 months after Doom too. Now, back in the day, that was an eternity between game engine updates. New games usually came packaged with new tech, and game devs were churning these games out left and right, sometimes 1 or 2 a year. So for a current game to be running on 2-year-old tech, well, that felt like a death sentence out of the gate. With rapidly evolving technology in the mid-90s, everyone wanted to see the new hotness, how a game would evolve the graphics and the interactivity as well as how it would play. This would catch up to the FPS genre in not so great ways down the line, but in 1994, this was prompting the tech to grow in leaps and bounds and inspired developers to keep up with the hotness. At this point in time, Ken Silverman, who you'll remember as creator of Ken's Labyrinth, signed up with Apogee to work on his newfangled game engine, the Build Engine. Now, you kids already know what that is, so I don't need to go into that here, but the Dips were faced with a decision: scrap all their hard work done in the Wolf 3D engine and rebuild everything from scratch in the fancy powerful new tech, or stick with what they had and push it to the absolute limits. While the idea of fancy new tech was admittedly appealing, build was still an untested frontier, and it was decided that Rise of the Triad would ship on the older tech. But my god, what they did with this older tech. Kids, I've already mentioned the fog and dynamic lighting, but something else they managed to pull off here was height and platforms within levels. Some levels were as high as 16 stories, which they played with using jump pads that can springboard both the player and enemies super high into the sky, as well as the Mercury power-up, which literally allows you to fly around, rising and falling using the look up or look down keys. They also created and implemented floating platforms called GADs, or gravitational anomaly discs, which are essentially silver discs that defy gravity, either floating in the air or rising and falling to use as access to other platforms. According to Joe Siegler on his blog, the GADs had to be placed with precise hex values in the map editor in order for them to be spaced properly throughout the game so players wouldn't get stuck on them. Tom Hall would crack the code and print out a sheet of hex numbers that would craft a perfect set of stairs using the GADs every time, and when he eventually left Apogee in 1996, he bequeathed the GAD sheet to Siegler, who has it taped to his monitor to this very day. This and other behind-the-scenes stories would literally fill up an entire video on its own, so I'm going to instead provide a link to Siegler's blog, which was celebrating the 20th anniversary of Rise of the Triad at the time. Now, you kids should absolutely read that and get some fun insights into the wild and wacky proceedings that happened to create this game. But as it always boils down to, Rise of the Triad would eventually release the shareware version of the game on December 21st, 1994, titled The Hunt Begins, somehow uploaded by the Dips despite the fact that there was a power outage during their first attempt to upload it. This led to an impromptu water rocket balloon fight in the offices, in the dark. Say what you will about Rise of the Triad, but it is absolutely clear that the developers were having a blast behind the scenes. Now, what's interesting about the shareware version of this game is that, unlike other shareware models at the time, The Hunt Begins is a completely unique set of levels all on their own that don't connect to the full version of the game at all, aside from the same setting and weapons and enemies. Like, Wolfenstein's shareware was the first full episode of the game. Doom's shareware was the first full episode of the game, but this is like getting a prequel chapter before then reading the full book, which is honestly cool as hell, but it definitely made my research super confusing. So like, when I started looking up this game, I found the release date of December 21st, 1994, so I'm like, great, that places Rise of the Triad in 1994 as far as the history of FPS goes, but that's just the release date for the shareware version. The full version of the game didn't release until February of 1995, so technically, this game, which I'm slotting into the 1994 section of the history of FPS, actually released in 1995, because the shareware version of the game is a completely separate product and not just the initial free batch of levels you could download before paying for the rest of the episodes. I was so fucking confused when I figured this out, especially because I technically own the shareware version and I can play it, but I couldn't figure out how to actually run it, which, I mean, I couldn't figure out how to run it because I could barely get the source ports to work correctly in a way that would allow me to record footage, and I just, you know what, let's get down to something about this game. I never played this game when it first came out. I was too busy in 1994 playing with my super legal and not pirated copy of Doom 2, and I spent pretty much all of 1995 with my face glued to a CRT while playing Super Nintendo, and I initially spent the first part of 1996 lusting over Duke Nukem 3D until Quake hit in June of that same year. Once Quake emerged like a rough beast slouched towards Bethlehem, there was literally nothing else on my radar. Can you tell? But of course, my family still didn't own a PC powerful enough to own and play Quake at home, so I would frequently hop over to a friend's house and jam on his desktop. Sometimes, though, he'd get tired of playing through Quake and offer up a different FPS title that he found mildly hilarious. This weird, crispy gore fest called Rise of the Triad. I played it a little bit, at least enough to fondly remember eyeballs flying all across the screen and running around with 2 pistols instead of just 1. But the name on the marquee of this channel isn't Ruby Enforcer. It's Ruby Ranger. And to be honest, I didn't want to touch another FPS title until Quake 2 dropped at the end of 1997, and I literally built a PC so I could play that one. But that's a story for another day. So that being said, coming back to actually play through this game for the first time was a bit of a rough hog to hold down. Starting with the goddamn source ports. Look, Rise of the Triad doesn't really have a good source port currently. I mean, yeah, I ended up making do with WinRot GL, but there's also the Iculus source port and Rot RXP. Now, I tried Iculus, but the resolution on that went from flimsy to fucked. And I either couldn't record footage through it, or what footage I did record displayed in 4:3 ratio versus 16:9, even though I was playing the game in 16:9. So I finally settled on using WinRot, but what I didn't expect was that it upped the gamma correction by default, so my initial footage looked like this. And after a little fiddling, finally figured out how to fix the gamma and play the game in the lighting it was meant to be played. And on top of that, every game that I have played for this series thus far, I've been able to capture around 60 frames per second, but not Rise of the Triad. Oh no, kids! Today's episode is brought to you in cinematic 35 frames per second. And no, I'm not gonna try and upscale this shit in post because I have had enough technical speed bumps in the process of getting this whole thing put together. I'm just trying to sail through it. At the time of this video, there has been a remaster of the game in development for a couple of years at least, but most recently announced to be under the wings of Apogee, Night Dive Studios, and motherfucking New Blood. This powerhouse trio is calling the remaster the Ludicrous Edition. It's going to feature widescreen support, higher frame rate, optimized controls, even revamped multiplayer and new levels. Of course, they couldn't, have it finished by the time I was getting ready to make this video, so I had to make do with scratching my head trying to figure out how to move the right files into the right folders with this source port business. Thanks, Dave. All that being said, getting this game up and running to a point where A, it was enjoyable, and B, it was recordable was the kind of hassle that I dread whenever I start up one of these videos. I played through the opening level so many times just testing out recording through the different ports that when I finally got to run it for real and continue onwards, I was bored out of my fucking mind with it. But that's me getting ahead of myself a little bit again. The game opens up with a simple menu, very standard issue for the FPS titles of the time. Going into a new game has us choosing a character to play as, which is interesting. Very interesting that a game like this would have a character select, especially factoring that not only does each character have their own unique stats, such as max health, speed, and defense, but we have a properly diverse group to choose from. Taradino Cassatt, who was the only character we could play as in the shareware release, T. Barrett, Lorelei Nee, Doug Wendt, and Ian Paul Freely. So in case you weren't aware, Tom Holland's a bit of a comedian, a class clown type of guy, and naming a guy IP Freely is only the tip of the goddamn iceberg as far as the tongue-in-cheek content here is concerned. I played through the game as Doug Wendt because he has a higher defense than the other characters despite moving a bit slower, and I've heard things, so I figured the defense boost would come in handy. Once we choose our character and we get a brief little cutscene setting the stage, which for some reason WinRot and Bandicam didn't get along very well when cutscenes were playing, so the frame rate here is a lot choppier in the footage than it is in the game. We only get brief cutscenes at the beginning, the end, and at the start of each episode, so the footage is, it's fine. It's usable still. Notable here is that despite being an episodic FPS game, we're not prompted to choose an episode to dive into. Nope. Rise of the Triad is a straightforward start-to-finish arcade experience, which becomes super evident the moment we're dumped into the first arena. Okay, so this is kind of a lot to absorb all at once when you're first dumped into the game, so let's slow it down a second. First off, when you're given control, you'll probably first notice the pistol lying on the ground directly in front of you. Gamer instincts will no doubt kick in, and you'll walk over it expecting to pick up ammo, seeing as you already have a pistol, but woo! You actually pick up the goddamn pistol, and now you have 2 fucking guns to shoot with right off the jump immediately. Holy fucking shit, kids. You'll also notice the infinite symbol down in the corner where the ammo counter should be. Not only do you have 2 pistols, but you have infinite ammo for them. Oh my fucking god, tell me more. Well, you no doubt heard that rockin' MIDI soundtrack in the background. High tempo and upbeat and insanely catchy. Well, that is the work of one Lee Jackson, who was the primary composer for Rise of the Triad, along with an assist from Bobby Prince, the John Williams of the FPS genre. This soundtrack, this soundtrack is, oh, god damn. This soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks ever composed for a first-person shooter ever. I have had tracks from this game stuck in my head for the last few days, and I haven't played the game in like a week. This shit is so good, I will wake up and have Going Down the Fast Way playing in my head from the moment I open my eyes. I'll come back to the music in a minute. We have to focus here for a second. Alright, so you come around the corner and you find Triad guards. You start shooting. One of them bounces off of a jump pad into the air, which serves as a quick and stupid simple way to teach the player what jump pads will do. And then off to the left, you hear the sound of a guard shouting, prompting you to turn towards him, and the camera automatically angles upwards so that you can hit him with your bullets and then recenters once he's dead. You'll also notice the gads all around, moving up and down, floating in the air, creating stairs. This first level, and by extension, the entire first episode, does a whole lot of work teaching the player about the way the game works while being completely effortless in doing so. Grab gun, now you have 2 guns, infinite ammo. Guards are here, jump pads toss you and them into the air. Sometimes they're up high, just turn towards them and you'll aim. We'll also run into switches that deactivate flame traps. There's spinning blades that are clearly dangerous, but jump pads let us jump over them. There's a power-up back here you can pick up and use to cruise through the rest of the level, but I didn't do that in this footage because I'd run through this mission so many times that I wanted to stick just with the gun, so we'll come back to the subject of power-ups. We'll also pick up an MP40, which also has infinite ammo and immediately becomes the only bullet weapon we'll be using for the rest of the game. I say specifically bullet weapon because scattered throughout every level are rocket launchers of various design. Standard issue bazookas, heat seekers, split missiles which fire 2 rockets at once, drunk missiles which fire 5 small rockets that spread outward, the firebomb which does a huge fiery explosion in 4 directions, and the flame wall which, if the missile hits the ground, sends a massive wall of flame cascading outward in the direction that you fired it. Rocket launchers all have limited ammo, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the placement and whether you're picking them up off of a fallen enemy. You won't want to be too cavalier with rocket usage, for one, because the explosions are really fucking powerful and can do a lot of damage to you if you're too close to them, and for 2, because honestly, your MP40 will stun lock most enemies in the game, so using rockets unnecessarily will only lead to you not having rockets when you'll really want to be using them. Now, it might seem a little dead simple to only be rolling with a submachine gun for 90% of the combat in the game, and maybe even a little boring when you consider that you have infinite ammo and basically use only one weapon, and yeah, at first, I was completely bored with this aspect of the game. There was a whole lot of running around, MP40 blazing, and as you listen to the same machine gun fire sound effect over and over, all while stun locking guards in place, sometimes using rockets, sometimes just standing in one place and firing over and over because you can, yeah, I was a little bored out of my mind during most of the first episode. Which, what doesn't help is how fucking weird this game is. I mean, fucking weird as fuck. So earlier I mentioned the power-ups, which are tossed in here and there like fine croutons in a delicious salad, but these power-ups are the equivalent of in-game cheat codes that will either aid you or hinder you. No, seriously, straight up, 2 of the so-called power-ups are absolutely designed to fuck you up and fuck you over if you pick them up. For starters, we have God Mode. That's the power-up that I skipped over in the first level. You become completely invincible, your weapon changes to an outstretched hand, and you throw balls of godly energy which home in on enemies. Simple enough, good shit. I appreciate a good God mode in any game. Except that, well, listen. there's that weird sound. So according to Tom Hall, who performed that vocal for the game, he was doing his imitation of the sounds that John Romero would make whenever he would run around in Doom testing out the God mode cheat in that game. So what you're hearing here is Tom Hall as John Romero as God, which is, you know, that's actually kind of cool. That's interesting. I'm gonna roll with it. Next up is dog mode, which turns you into a dog. No, really, you're an invincible dog. You can bite enemies to death, or you can charge up your attack into an ear-piercing howl, which makes almost everything around you explode. And since you're dog-sized, you can gain access to super small doorways in certain levels, so you can grab bonus items or keys or what have you. And you know what? For the most part, outside of the fact that you can't pick up any rocket launchers while in dog and god mode, these two power-ups, while both distinctly weird, are kind of awesome to use and run around and just destroy everything in your path for a short while. Mercury mode is another beneficial power-up that I mentioned previously in the video. You pick it up and you can fly for a short time. Super simple and easy and can really let you go hog wild navigating and exploring the levels. Of course, we then have the shrooms mode power-up. Oh god, why? And then there's Elasto mode, which makes you bounce off of walls and objects and increases your inertia, so you're constantly pinballing all around until the effect wears off. These two so-called power-ups are oftentimes placed in certain ways as to be obstacles more than anything else, forcing you to deal with the effects while also braving the hazardous environment around you. And while the enemies throughout most of the first episode are fairly easy to deal with, they'll wreck your shit if you're not paying attention to where you are and where they are. There are low guards and high guards wielding pistols and MP40s respectively, although sometimes the low guards will randomly have rocket launchers, unless that's the lightning guards. No, that's right, lightning guards. Lightning guards carry pistols and sometimes rocket launchers. I didn't know. The enemy classification is still a bit fuzzy to me because in the heat of the moment, you're not going to be thinking about what the basic bitch fodder guards are called. I sure wasn't. I was more concerned with what they were shooting and how quickly I could shoot them back. The over patrol can be problematic if you don't deal with them fast enough because they can and will throw nets at you to trap you in place. There are statues located here and there in the levels which hold knives that you can steal for future use, so if you get caught by a net, you can just cut yourself out immediately. Yeah, you steal knives from statues in this game. And if you want to get some health back, you're gonna find two kinds of meals lying about to consume. Monk meals, which give a little health, and priest porridge, which gives even more. If you happen to have a rocket launcher and can spare the explosion, creating a fireball near the food will heat it up, in which case it will give you extra health for being warm. You can also find healing basins, which I think are basically fountains filled with some kind of holy water for healing. Makes about as much sense as anything in this game. Finally, there's the Ankh coins literally everywhere in the game, which at first I didn't feel like dealing with because, one, I'm not going for a high score or anything like that in this game, so I didn't feel like picking up coins for points. Two, picking up 100 of them grants an extra life, which, if you're me, you're saving your game and loading that anyway, so the concept of having extra lives is kind of moot. The game will even ask you if you want to quick load your most recent save when you die, which is handy. However, picking up 25 Ankh coins will grant you a little health bonus, which is easily one of the most welcome things in this game. Running around, dodging bullets, and running low on health while scrambling for some porridge feels just a little bit easier when you grab that 25th coin and get a generous amount of health back. See, yes, this game is fucking weird, but there's a deft creative balance to it all. Weapon swapping between the MP40 and whichever rocket launcher you have to strategically eliminate the threats in front of you, hunting for coins and food to top up your health in between avoiding traps and enemies. Oh, and sometimes the guards will be lying on the ground playing possum, waiting for you to get too close, and then they'll pop up and start blasting at you, so be prepared for that. But despite the focus placed on enemy placement and strategically dancing around combat, there's an even bigger focus on navigating the hazardous environments. And when I say hazardous, I mean, like if Pee-wee's Playhouse was designed by the Jigsaw Killer after unlocking the Lament configuration. We've got spinning blades, spikes, crushers, flame jets, fireballs, moving walls, moving flame walls. Every single map in this game is just as much a danger to you as the enemy placement is. There's one map in the second episode called The Room, which doesn't even have any enemies. It is just one big room filled with flame jets and firewalls and an escalating series of fireballs that activate every time you hit a necessary switch for unlocking another part of the map to proceed. I'll say it again, 0 enemies. And and it is literally one of the toughest maps in the entire game. And that's not even touching on the labyrinthine design of the maps. Holy shit! So as mentioned briefly above, the ceiling on some of these levels can reach up to 16 stories tall. This allows for secrets placed up high to be reached by either gads, jump pads, or mercury power-ups. These maps can also be something like... I think like a mile wide? They're huge, which means that there are elevators employed in certain levels which neither move you up nor down, but instead magically teleport you to a different location on the map to make travel easier, or to just simply break up the map into different chunks and make exploration even trickier. But when you combine height, ceiling, gad placement, locked doors, elevator usage, and the fact that Tom Hall was one of the designers on Wolfenstein, which had infamously, deviously maze-like maps, then you might have a touch of an intuition as to how crazy lost you can get in this game. Much like Wolfenstein, Rise of the Triad employs the use of push walls in order to access secrets. Push walls can be activated in one of two ways. One, it's a wall that you're meant to press the use key on, in which case the wall will slide backwards or to the side, revealing the secret path that you've been dedicatedly searching for. Or two, you'll find a switch or a touch plate which will activate said push wall and the wall will move somewhere inside the map. Touch plate triggered. A wall has moved. I see those words in my sleep now. Touch plates appear as shadows on the ground, which, when walked over, activate something in the environment, like a push wall or a column, and you'll get a notification saying that something has moved somewhere, and now you need to go find it to proceed. And then... even worse, once you've gotten as far as you can get, you're not sure where to go, you'll have to start hunting for these near invisible touch plates on the ground, just begging that they'll open up another path for you to proceed down. And on top of that, not only do you need to find these touch plates to move walls and columns, there's still some columns which can be pushed manually, so you'll be wall humping and column humping in order to open up pathways while searching for switches and touch plates. The hunting, scavenging, the desperate search across impressively and insanely huge levels, trying to figure out exactly where said wall has moved so I can gain access to either a key or a path I need to progress forward. Oh my god, this nearly broke me during the first episode. There is, however, a very powerful automap which pauses the game whenever you hit tab and will show you literally everything that you've been able to make eye contact with as you've been running around. And the nice thing is that if you've moved a wall or a column on the map, the automap will show that updated opening or a movement so you can potentially cut down the amount of time you spend running around trying to figure out what the hell you've just moved in this goddamn area. Still, there was, at one point, a map where I was literally wandering around for 30 minutes with no clue where to find the key I needed to open the gold door for progression, and I was just pressed. I was so pressed, I broke down and looked up a long play of the game on YouTube to figure out where I needed to go. And it turned out the path I needed to take had literally been right next to the push wall switch I had found, not exactly hidden from sight, but difficult to see in the environment. In that moment, I took out my phone and I messaged my brother and your gaming uncle, Pancake Detective, and I told him, I think I hate this game. I was so bored. I was so aggravated. I was trying real hard to get into this game, and the combat wasn't grabbing me. The dickish map design wasn't working for me. The weird power-ups weren't working for me. And I was only pressing onwards because, I wasn't being bounced out like I was with System Shock. I was just bored and frustrated. So when I was running through the 6th map of Episode 1, called Spring Surprise, which features some really nice fog effects, I picked up the Flame Wall Launcher for the very first time in the game, and when you use it on enemies, this is what happens. Now, I don't know what it was about that little effect specifically, but I realized that I had cracked a smile. So I grabbed my phone and I texted Pancake Detective something else. This game is fucking awesome. I don't know what it was about this stupid little flame wall interaction, but it just actually and absolutely cemented in my head what this game is going for. The charm, the oddity of the situation, and the absurdity of the power-ups, the tongue-in-cheek nonsense that the game has been trying this whole time to get me in on the joke. There was just something in that stupid little the xylophone sound effect for the bones crumbling. I got it. I finally got it. Everything the game was going for finally made sense to me. And from this point onwards, I was 100% in. In hindsight, Episode 1 is a bit of a softball leading up to Episode 2 in terms of combat. They're getting you used to traversing bullshit maps and secret hunting and switch hunting and trap dodging, also that when Episode 2 lands, it lands like a fucking hammer to the back of your head, leaving you stumbling to turn around and fight back, all while trying to get out of the way of the next attack attack. But first, we have to fight the game's first boss, General Darien. There are 4 bosses in the game, all of which are fantastic boss fights, all of which have a bit of a gimmick to them. Darien's bit is that he's holed himself up inside a locked room and won't come out until after a few minutes of you dodging spike traps he sends your way. He'll vanish into the floor to avoid your attacks and then pop up to shoot rockets at you before vanishing again. And you'll have to be quick because none of the bosses can be damaged by bullet weapons, so you'll have to be fast with those rockets or you'll be in for a bit of a bad time in a long fight. But once you succeed, you'll be treated to Episode 2, Area 1, which opens up with quite possibly the best track in a first-person shooter ever. At least top 5. Going Down the Fast Way. The track that lives rent-free in my head when I wake up now. And so I'm going to deliver some footage and the music for you to understand just how much this game immediately switches gears to the feeling of waging a one-man war on a powerful enemy. Jesus, I'm sweaty just listening to it. Speaking of sweaty, the game decides to throw a couple curveballs your way by introducing 2 new enemies, the Strike Force and the legendary Enforcers. Strike Force will attempt to, and sometimes succeed at rolling out of the way of your attacks. If you're using the MP40, you can easily stun lock them in place, but if you're firing a rocket, you might miss and waste precious ammo. The Enforcers, meanwhile, are the first enemies in the game that will make you want to hold off on using rockets on anyone else so you can take these fuckers out. They carry a belt-fed machine gun and can throw grenades at you. They can't be fully stun-locked with the MP40 and will slip in attacks between your bullets, and without a rocket, it will take a lot of fucking bullets to put one down. 1 Enforcer in a room is cause for concern, 2 or more in a room is a dance with death itself. Now, a couple of properly aimed rockets or 1 hit from the flame well will take them out, but if you're not paying attention to the other guards in the room, you'll either get screwed by the other bullets flying your way, or you'll get hit by the Enforcer because you let off your attack on him to deal with the other guards. Combat really, truly, blissfully becomes a nerve-wracking exercise once Episode 2 hits, and from here on out, it never lets up. Well, okay, it kind of does, but we'll get there. But for the most part, Episodes 2 and 3 mostly just expand on the base established with Episode 1, providing more expansive levels with ever more complicated push walls and touchpads and traps. Hell, the maps are so convoluted in design that at one point, I accidentally found myself at the entrance to a secret level without even meaning to do so.
I'm in danger!
The secret level was surprisingly a lot easier to navigate than the level I'd just been on, so I took that as a minor win. One environmental hazard that I forgot to mention earlier are the boulders, which will drop from the ceiling and roll at way too fast a pace across the room before falling into another hole in the ground and then disappearing. It is a massively intimidating sight to see a room filled with multiple rows of boulders dropping down and having to gauge how and when to move between them. Oh shit, I almost forgot that there's armor in this game too. There's 2 types, bulletproof armor and asbestos armor. Just like the other power-ups in the game, the armor will wear off over time rather than stack up like in other FPS titles. So for example, with the asbestos armor, you'll be 99% protected from fire damage for the duration of the armor, meaning you can waltz through fireballs and take rockets to the face as much as possible, and you'll only take the most minuscule of damage. You'll still take just the tiniest amount of hits to your health bar, so keep that in mind. I had a couple of times where I was strolling through the level just tanking fire damage with the asbestos armor on, and then turned and took a couple of bullets from some guards and went down faster than I should have. You won't notice it until you pick up some porridge along the way, but otherwise the armor is just really handy and awesome. Episode 2 caps off with a boss fight against Sebastian Christ, a brilliant scientist in a mechanical wheelchair that shoots rockets and is surrounded by enforcers. Just like with General Darien, all you need is patience and twin load a bunch of rockets into him, and you'll eventually be on your way towards Episode 3. Episode 3 also introduces new concepts and enemies, like the robot guards and the ballisticraft. Robot guards are invulnerable to bullets and can only be taken out with rockets, while ballisticraft are completely impervious to damage, so if you see one, just fucking run past as fast as possible before they start shooting rockets at you. Introducing the robot guards is a neat trick on the game's part, because now that you have enemies which can only be downed with rockets creates an interesting ammo strategy. You'll need rockets for the robot guards, but you'll want rockets for the enforcers that continue to appear throughout the game. And with the insane levels of devious hazards that the game has ramped up to, you'll be twitching with adrenaline rounding each corner, hoping and praying and begging for everything to go your way as you save your game again, knowing at this point that things are going to just go tits up real fast no matter what you do, so you should probably just dive in guns blazing. Weapon swapping, sometimes leaning on the MP40 for the enforcers when you really just want to use a rocket but you're not sure if there's a robot guard around the corner, really hammers home the need to consider everything in your arsenal and in the map in such a precise, complex methodology, you'll feel like you're practically doing the FPS equivalent of algebra on the fly. Most modern retro shooters would have wet dreams about having the kind of truly tight combat that Rise of the Triad actually has. Episode 3 is probably the apex of the game's level design and combat loop. Like, I felt pushed to really think and explore and consider the environment all around me, wall humping and utilizing the automap for clues and any sense of direction, and never once being bored from getting lost and exploring sections that I'd already explored 3 times over, just in the hopes that I could find a hidden touch plate or displaced wall. And holy fuck. The final boss of Episode 3 is the NME, basically an entire missile silo in rolling robot form that is tough as nails to fight and will abso-fucking-lutely wreck your shit multiple times. Since there are regular robot guards around the arena, you'll want to try and take them out first, but Jesus, once the NME starts rolling around, you need to stay frosty and stay mobile or you are instantly screwed. I'd heard how hard this boss was through the internet chatter, but I was not prepared. You will not be prepared. Nothing can prepare you for this fight. You just have to do your best to keep the enemy as far away as possible while you reload on health and rocket launchers. This was the only boss fight where I saved multiple times throughout the battle whenever I could. It's that tough. Finally seeing that victory message that the enemy was destroyed was fuck yes. Nothing should feel this good. And then we cross the border into Episode 4 and, well... So here in Episode 4, we get a bunch of new shit to play with. First up are the monk enemies. There's 2 types, the death monk who is melee only, and the death fire monk who will conjure fireballs to throw at you that really fucking hurt. Then we've also got the 2 new magic weapons, which when you pick them up, will replace whatever you have in the rocket launcher slot at the time. We've got the Excalibat and the Dark Staff. Now the Dark Staff is pretty straightforward. You hold down the button for a moment and it will shoot a shot of dark energy, basically a magic missile, good shit, even if the windup kinda sucks. And the Excalibat will bop enemies and send them flying until you hit them enough times to kill them. But you can also charge up an attack which will send a bunch of magic explosive baseballs flying outward in multiple directions. Did I actually read that right? Or, we also have a new health restorative in the form of the Monk Crystals. All things told, Episode 4 throws a lot of new shit at you. The most annoying of which are the monks. Hands down. I absolutely fucking hate the monks. Bullet sponge enemies who take so many bullets to kill, and depending on the circumstances, at least 1 more rocket than the enforcers do. Considering the first 2 maps are basically all monks and only monks and nothing but monks, the momentum that the game has built up till now quickly grinds down to a screeching halt as suddenly, rather than clever weapon swapping and fast action reflex oriented violence, we're pretty much bottlenecked into dealing with enemies that take way too many hits to kill while dealing out far too much damage onto us. Not gonna lie, the first couple of maps of Episode 4 nearly sent me back to the phone for another text message to the Pancake Detective, but I struggled through, and ultimately, I found a decent groove. I don't know, I don't want to start disparaging the game here so close to the end, because what we've got isn't necessarily bad. There's still convoluted level design and environmental puzzle solving. There's still great tunes pumping in our ears thanks to the continually great soundtrack, and the overall weapon feel is still just as good. It just sucks that now there's an overwhelming reliance on these new enemies who just soak up so much damage that the MP40 doesn't feel viable anymore. Standing in place, emptying an infinite amount of bullets into the monks as they slowly lumber closer over and over again just isn't nearly as fun as the previous episodes of the game were. This is, in all honesty, due to the fact that it's mostly monks. If they were spaced out more and introduced piecemeal like how the enforcers and robot guards were, we'd still have great momentum going and a larger variety of guards to tackle. And eventually we do as we get further into the episode. But here in the opening chapters, it's slow grinding through the waves of monks as rocket launchers run out frequently and we're forced to use the MP40 as our only means of offense. But there's still good stuff to be found here. It's not terrible, it's just a bit of a slog. I can push through that, no problem. And then we finally arrive at El Oscuro, leader of the Triad cult and possessor of incredible dark powers. This asshole. So first off, I want to point out that the actor who plays El Oscuro is none other than Tom Hall himself, so this is a nice little cheeky John Romero's head inside the icon of sin moment. But second, this boss fight is fucking cheap as fuck. I double checked my footage and noted that it took me over half an hour to beat El Oscuro. That's a fucking lifetime in FPS years. Half a fucking hour. And do you know why, kids? Well, if you're a seasoned veteran of Rise of the Triad, I bet you already know why. It's because you're not actually supposed to attack El Oscuro. Nope. Attacking him actually makes him stronger. It causes him to return fire using magic attacks that mirror the weapon you hit him with. What you need to do is take out the monks that are populating his arena and basically circle strafe around the asshole while he uses up all of his magic power trying to zap you. Once he runs out of energy, he mutates into a giant snake comprised of supermassive Oscuro heads and then slithers away towards the exit where you have to chase him. I'm sorry, what? How in the goddamn fuck in a game where the primary directive is to shoot shit and blow shit up am I supposed to guess that I shouldn't attack the final boss? I had to go searching for answers on what to do during all of this, and when I read that you're just supposed to let him keep attacking until he's worn out, kids? I don't have anything clever for this. But it's the final boss, right? So now we have to just go finish this bastard off. Walking into the exit after he escapes puts us in the canyon chase level, which is fucking awesome. El Oscuro is slithering away at max speed, and it's our job to chase him to the exit. Super simple, super easy. But Oscuro is constantly just rounding corners up ahead, just out of sight. We're sprinting past Deathfire monks who are taking potshots at us as we run past. It's honestly pretty fucking tense. It's a great example of a gimmick level done right, as the whole point is just a blazing fast chase sequence after waiting for Oscuro to wear himself out. All right, hats off to the devs. I see what you were going for. Okay, gonna give it a pass. Now we're at the actual final level, and we have to track down Snake Oscuro and take him out once and for all, but there's a bit of a twist involved. It seems that Oscuro in his snake form has laid a bunch of eggs all over the place, any and all of which could hatch into his offspring and destroy the world some 30 years down the line if we don't kill them all. Yeah, if you don't kill them all and you kill Oscuro, you get the bad ending, which tells you the offspring grew up and hatched and took over the world, and it reloads the final mission so that you can try again. Ouch. Now, this wouldn't be so fucking brutal of an ending if it wasn't for the fact that 90% of the eggs in the level are hidden in a secret area, which if you manage to grab the Mercury power up before dropping into the arena, you'll be able to just fly over to and be set. But if you didn't, your only course of action is to grab some asbestos armor, grab a firebomb, and fucking rocket jump over the wall and into the egg arena. When we covered Marathon last time in the history series, we talked about dual wielding and rocket jumping. And here, Rise of the Triad is, again, doing both. Seeing as how the full version of Rise of the Triad didn't release until February 1995, I think we can definitively say that Marathon did it first, but holy shit, this is still a wild fucking thing to have to do in order to get the good ending of this game. Anyways, once we clear out all of these fucking eggs, which are surrounded by Deathfire monks no less, it's back out to the main arena to face El Oscuro in his snake form. He'll only take rocket damage just like the other bosses, and only when he's hovering over the fire pits, which are generously placed in a wide line across the middle of the arena. And after enough rockets or dark staff hits, El Oscuro will fucking explode in the most glorious and gratuitous display we've seen yet in this game. And after this, the hunt finish off their objectives, swim back to the mainland, and we're treated to the ending credits, in which we get to see all the credited actors who played the individual guards and bosses. Notable are Scott Miller as the strike team, George Broussard as the enforcer, Joe Siegler as Christ, and Lee Jackson himself as the death monk. What a wild fucking ride. Kids, I'm just like gobsmacked at the fact that I've never played this game more back in the day. But to be honest though, the game was kind of an oddity, even upon release. It was a game running on an engine that was already considered ancient by the time it came out. It was going up against the fact that Doom 2 had released 2 months earlier, and then Heretic would end up releasing only a couple days after this, so the deck was kind of stacked against it from the start. Rise of the Triad would end up selling somewhere around 100,000 copies, get an expansion in the form of Extreme Rise of the Triad. No, I will not be playing that. No fucking thank you. And then eventually in 2013 we get a remake done by Interceptor, which is an entire video in and of itself that I will get to eventually. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to get there, but I will. Meanwhile, the developers of Incredible Power would move forward after the release of Rise of the Triad to work on a little game called Prey. You may have heard of it. Except that they didn't get too far into development, and their version of the game was canceled before Human Head would pick up the project and finally release their version of the game in 2006, which is, again, an entire video in and of itself. So, staying focused here for now. What happened with this game? Well, as the title of this chapter in the history of FPS suggests, it became a bit of a cult classic, never really rising to the heights that Doom and Duke and Quake would see. Within a few years of the release of Rise of the Triad, newer technology and less focus on strictly arcade action would dominate the world of FPS games and leave this game, which is honestly a brilliant accomplishment of tight combat and sweeping exploration, in the rear view mirror as everyone else moved on. Well, maybe not everyone. Because, as I mentioned just a moment ago, in 2013 there was a remake of the game that came out, which proved that there was a desire to see this game get its due in the modern age. But even beyond that effort, there has been a singular force of nature which has reintroduced Rise of the Triad into the zeitgeist. And so, finally, after much meandering, the intro of this video will finally make sense. Although, if you're a fan of retro FPS titles and you are on YouTube in any way, shape, or form, then you're probably already familiar with Civvy. For those of you who aren't, I'm talking about YouTube creator CV11, affectionately known as Civvy11. His first video was released back in March of 2017, covering the FPS title Corridor 7. Now, Civvy's whole bit is that his show is one massive shitpost, covering old, janky first-person shooters, all while trapped in some kind of supermax prison and being tortured by the robotic guards who oversee his punishment. In the almost 6 years since he started making videos, Civvy's become a beloved icon in the FPS community, with clever quips and hilarious editing, and his ability to throw himself into some of the absolute worst dreck the FPS category has ever produced, all while displaying a deep love and knowledge of such classics as Doom, Blood, and Postal. But the thing with Civvy, which many of us didn't know for a while, I mean, didn't know at least until he pointed it out, was that a lot of the musical tracks he uses in his videos are pulled from the Rise of the Triad soundtrack. He's employed a number of cues over the years in various videos just simply because he loves the music from Rise of the Triad so much. But it's those end credits. The end credits to every video he's ever put out, even starting with his very first video, is How'd I Do by Lee Jackson, which plays at the end of every mission in Rise of the Triad and is the track you heard at the very front of this video.
Asylum full of cultists and the moment-to-moment joy of action and reaction between the small armies you're facing everywhere else. Stamp it, Civvy approved. Roll the How'd I Do.
When Civvy put out his Rise of the Triad video, which you should go watch because the man loves this game, and to listen to him talk about this is far more entertaining than I could ever be at it. And he revealed that his musical cues were from this game. I was fucking blown away. Now anytime I think of Rise of the Triad, I immediately picture Civvy. From the moment I sat down to start playing Rise of the Triad, I had more than a few instances where I felt like I was getting a peek into the man's brain space. Like, fuck, if I had played as much of this game as Civvy did, then I'd probably be locked in a supermax prison reviewing Slavjank and Electroshocked every other hour also. Do you kids have any content creators that, you know, when you think of them, or you think about a specific game, you then immediately cross-reference in your head back to that game or the creator? Like, you can't get them out of their head. They're just mixed in your brain for forever. Couple examples. Whenever I see Elephants Doing Crack pop up, I associate him with Half-Life because of his absolutely brilliant Half-Life video that he has made. Trav Guy, who has covered a wide variety of games. Whenever I see him do anything, I immediately think about Mega Man X and Metroid because of his coverage of those two series. But But Civvy? Yeah, I know most of you kids probably think of Doom or Blood, but that man is forever associated with Rise of the Triad in my head. There is no separating them. It's like a pair of conjoined twins, or a Frankensteinian amalgam of limbs sewn together so you don't know where one ends and the other begins. Civvy is forever the guy who reintroduced me to Rise of the Triad. Not just in talking about it in a couple of videos, but through insidiously earworming Lee Jackson's brilliant music for this game into my brain pan to such an extent that listening to this soundtrack makes me think of Civvy, and watching Civvy makes me think of this game. God damn you, you son of a bitch. And yet, I'll be completely upfront that it was Civvy's work which inspired me to try out video essays on first-person shooters rather than attempt to get back into doing Let's Plays here on YouTube. And despite my first few videos being a little too close to copying his style, okay, maybe more than I like to admit, but still, I think I found my own voice since then. I couldn't be more grateful that his tomfoolery led to me working on this channel, and now, eventually, to play through Rise of the Triad in whole for the very first time and make my own video on the subject. Thanks, Civvy. I salute you. Rise of the Triad is an exceptional first-person shooter made by an exceptional group of developers at an exceptional time for FPS titles to be released. On one hand, the game itself being crafted on an outdated engine, employing arcade gameplay and tactics, meant that it was looking with fondness at the games that it had come before, such as Wolfenstein, as well as other arcade action titles, which were all about the player running amok in simple enjoyment. Simultaneously, with the bevy of modifications and the forward-thinking level and combat design, Rise of the Triad was also looking at the future of what games like this could accomplish, with different characters and weapon limitations, bursting with creativity in every pixel. There is life here. There's excitement here. There is a desire for this game, clearly put out there by the developers, to pull the player into a world of wild fun and gameplay, where it honestly feels like anything can happen at any point. Anything could happen in this game, and it would be, at the very least, interesting. Despite me not understanding what the game was going for in most of the first episode, and despite the final episode of the game turning into a bit of a slog with a needlessly obtuse boss near the end, Rise of the Triad maintains a sense of exuberance, of momentum-fueled gameplay, and some truly inspired design that keeps players on their toes and on the edge. Even with the awkward source ports that exist right now, the game is highly recommended to seek out. And when the Ludicrous Edition finally drops, I will be downloading that shit day one to dive back in and experience an optimized port so I can just eat it all up again from start to finish. Rise of the Triad gets a 9 out of 10. I find it very interesting that our last game, Marathon, was something I considered underrated and overlooked due to the platform it was released on, and here, Rise of the Triad is something I'd consider underrated simply because of the timing in which it was released, but at least Rise of the Triad has maintained its cult status amongst FPS gamers. I cannot fucking wait for the Ludicrous Edition to drop and reintroduce an entire new generation of FPS gamers to this fantastic experience all over again, because this is something that deserves far more praise and credit than I think it gets. Holy fucking shit, kids, there is one more stop to make in the year of 1994, and it is going to be Heretic, a game which I thoroughly enjoy and can't wait to dive in and examine every single detail. Now, until we get to that point, remember to stay hydrated, sit up straight, and if you're gonna get some takeout today, maybe grab something with some veggies mixed in for just a little extra nutrition, maybe some Chinese food. Nothing like orange chicken and broccoli beef to set you right. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.